Welcome to SPSS. So when you first open the program, you'll be given a few different options. These options include opening an existing data file or typing in new data. To get a blank data set like this one here with nothing in it, you would select the option to type in new data. So before you enter any data, you'll notice that both screens look the same. So we have the data view screen and the variable view screen, and without any data or values entered into the data set, they do look quite identical. However, you will see that they are very different once we get into actually using them. So to start, we'll go to the data view. So the data view is very similar to Excel in that this is where we're going to see all of the raw values in our data set. So how it works in SPSS is that each row represents a participant. So if we start creating some data here, so we'll start by creating an ID variable. We can give participant 1 an ID of 1, participant 2 an ID of 2, participant 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, etc. So what we've actually done here is we have created a variable with 5 values, and SPSS knows that we have 5 participants in this data set because we have 5 activated rows. So for example, if we were to enter more data along here, SPSS would know that we're adding participants. Whereas if we were to enter data into these these columns, SPSS would know that we are adding additional information about the existing participants. If you're to enter information, say down here on row 14, okay, so we entered a 1, SPSS has automatically added all these other participants here. Okay, notice right now the values have been activated. However, since we didn't actually enter any values, they're just being identified right now by this period, which means that there's no information there. So for now, we'll delete all of these participants. But there we go. So now we're just back to 5. Okay, so right now, SPSS has given this first variable a default name called var0001. If we want to change the name to that, it's very simple. We just need to click on the variable view here, and it's going to bring us to a different view. And what we can see here is the name of our variable, and by double-clicking, we can change it. So we will call it ID. SPSS is pretty open in terms of what you name your variables. The only rules are that they have to start with alphanumeric letters, so it has to be letters. You can have numbers and symbols in your variable names, however, they can't start with that. You can't have any spaces, so if you do want to add a space, you have to use an underscore, and then you can put numbers or whatever you want afterwards, and it'll be okay. But for now, we'll just keep that as ID. So you'll notice that we also have a lot of other options here, but before I show you those options, we're also going to create a few other variables. So we'll have gender and score. So gender is going to be a categorical variable where you have 2 categories. You can be either male or female. And score, let's say we have scores on a test from 0 to 10. So if we go back here, we're going to enter the rest of our information. So we have our participant IDs here, and now we want to enter gender. So SPSS can handle word variables. They call them strings. However, for the purposes of running analyses, it's always better to use numbers. So when trying to indicate gender, instead of writing male and female, you should assign a code to male and assign a code to female. So typically with gender, we would use 0s and 1s or 1s and 2s. So let's say for this particular example that males will be 1 and females will be 2. So I've entered this here, and I'll show you shortly how to make that also mean male and female, but for now we just have the numbers. And then these are their scores on 10. So let's say we have 7, 8, 9, 8, 10. Perfect. So we have a continuous variable here and a categorical variable and an ID variable. So if we go back to our variable view, we can tell SPSS a little bit more about this, and we can look at the different options here. So numeric essentially means that we're using numbers in the data set. I did mention that SPSS can handle words. However, if you're going to enter words, you have to change the type of variable here to string down at this option, and then SPSS knows to try or not to try to interpret the values in that variable as numbers and try to analyze it. Unfortunately, SPSS can't actually analyze string variables, so if you do indicate something as being string, it's just going to skip over it and not use it. So that might be fine if you're entering someone's address or something. However, if you do want to look at gender differences, you need to use the numeric option. So generally, we're going to just use numeric. Okay, the width here refers to how many characters wide the variable will be, and it includes the decimals. So for example, right now, let's say none of these variables need decimals, so we can take the decimals out. And you'll see now, if we go back, I only changed 2 of them, that the first 2 variables now don't have decimal points, but score still does. So we'll get rid of that here. And then we can also just reduce the overall width of the variable to, say, 2. And it just means that it won't be quite as wide, and that's that. So decimals and width are dealt with. Label is an opportunity to give a name to your variable that doesn't meet the name requirements of SPSS. So let's say, for example, that you found this code here that you've given it very ambiguous, and you'd like to use, maybe a longer sentence or some spaces to indicate something. You could here, for example, put, test scores or males and females instead of gender. And what this means is that when SPSS runs analyses with these variables, instead of using the variable name, it'll use this information to say that it's doing that. So we can leave that no problem. Or actually, we'll replace that just by gender. So values, this is very useful for categorical data if you want to assign a number or a code to the values in your variable. So if you recall, for the gender variable, we had indicated males with 1 and females with 2. Well, now to let SPSS know that we're doing that, we would click on this, and we would say 1 is male, and then you click add, and 2 is female, and click add. So once these are here, you can click OK, and then they should show up right there under the values option. And if we go back to the data view, you'll notice that nothing is changed. However, if we click up here, we can ask SPSS to show us the value labels, and if we click that, it changes to male and female. However, we still do have that underlying numerical value, which means that SPSS will be able to run analyses on this variable. Okay, going back. The next option we have is missing variable. So right now, our data set does not have any missing data, but if we were to go back and let's say that participant 4 is missing a score here. So if we want to tell SPSS that this is actually a missing data, we can assign it a code. Traditionally, we use something like 9999, and then we go back to the data set, and on score missing here, we would select discrete missing labels, and we could give it the code of 9999, and SPSS will automatically know that that is a missing value and that we will not analyze that particular case. Okay. Next option is the columns. You can ignore that. The alignment, you can also ignore that. And then the measurement level. So sometimes if you enter a lot of data into SPSS automatically or import data, it will attempt, based on the patterns of the data, to determine what the measurement level is. However, you should always double check this because it doesn't always get it right. So there are 3 options in SPSS. Scale refers to anything that's measured at the interval or ratio level. Ordinal is ordinal measurement, and then anything that's categorical is nominal. So in the case here, our ID variable, even though it technically, has a numerical value and sort of is ratio, since we're arbitrarily assigning these, you have to go with it's a nominal variable, and really you shouldn't use it in any analyses. It's more just to identify your participants. However, it's a good idea to make it nominal. Gender is also nominal because it's categorical, and our score on tests would be scale because it's a ratio variable where there is a 0 and the distance between each score is the same. And then you can ignore this last column here. So the reason it's important to use ID variables is because if ever you decide to sort your data, so let's say for example that we are going to sort our data in ascending order here, so just by right-clicking. Okay, so this output box is going to open. We close here, and what we've noticed is that it's now sorted the data from smallest to largest, and we've actually switched the order of the participants. So the numbers here no longer correspond with the same number they did before, and you can tell that based on the fact that this variable has been reordered. So obviously with just 5 participants and 3 variables, this isn't a really big deal. However, when you start having really large data sets, it's very important to assign an ID number so that you can keep track of which row of data belongs to which participant.